joining us this evening. Good evening and good afternoon, and for some it may be good morning. To all of our families who are joining us this evening, thank you for being with us. We very much appreciate you taking some time. As you all know, it is the case that we're close to the beginning of a new semester. And for those of us who've been to campus lately, you can feel it in the air. And we are really eagerly awaiting to see our students back. And just this week alone, our colleagues were back with our return to work. And so the purpose of our forum this evening and this afternoon for some is to have a chance to talk to you a little bit about the fall return. We know you have a lot of questions. Thank you to those of you who sent questions in advance. Please rest assured that we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. And for those that will not have had an opportunity to get to, rest assured that we'll make sure to get back to you by email. I'm joined by multiple colleagues today, but we're going to get started with President Burwell. It is indeed my honor to introduce to you briefly President Burwell. I think many of you who are now sophomore parents and perhaps upper class parents have had the opportunity to meet President Burwell with some of our webinars. President Burwell is the 15th president of American University, and she comes to us with a wealth of experience and in lots of sectors. Certainly, first and foremost, the government sector, but also the nonprofit world as well. She is the former HHS secretary, and she's worked for two administrations, the Obama administration and the Clinton administration. In addition, she worked for 10 years with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and was also president of the Walmart Foundation. For those of us who have had an opportunity to work with her, one of the things that you will immediately notice is her presence on campus. Someone who's very present, and students have lots of opportunities to get to engage with her throughout the time that they're here at the university. And so without further ado, it is my honor to introduce to you President Burwell.
Thank you, Fanta. I think many of you know Dr. Ah is a triple eagle. And I'm sure that probably about every parent on here, and there are many of you all, as you can see by the participant numbers, actually know Dr. Fanta Ah. She is an incredible presence on our campus, and we are so lucky to have her as part of this Eagle team. So thank you very much, Fanta. I want to officially welcome everybody. Welcome you all. And normally I would get to see you or welcome you in different ways throughout time, and that's been a little absent, but I'm very excited to welcome you this evening. And as a parent myself, want to say thank you for trusting you with our students. We have Stephen and I have an 11 and a 13-year-old, and like you, we are getting everything ready and gearing up. You all are starting about a week or so before we do, but we are, as parents, in a similar position, and like you probably, we are very much looking forward for the fall. I'm excited about the fall as a parent. I'm excited about the fall as a president of a university. We know it's not going to look like 2019, and it's not going to look like 2020. And so we thought it would be great to have an opportunity to discuss and hear your questions. So that's what we're doing with this session. And thank you for so many of you all joining us. And I also want to thank our team. As you can see, lots of our senior leadership are on so that we make sure that we're able to answer your questions and communicate our plan that we've been working on. I like to say we've been working on this plan in terms of what we're about to do for well over a year. And whether that was our mid-semester experience that we did, or the plans we put in place, to be honest with you, last summer that we then had to change. So this is a plan that has been worked on and iterated over a long period of time, incorporates lots of different learnings. It incorporates and works on listening to the science and listening to our community, which we have found an essential part of what we've done in the last 18 months. I'm talking about my excitement, but I also know that for a number of folks, there's anxiety. And that anxiety comes from a lot of different things, whether it's isolation and being away from folks that people have been for an extended period of time. For some of you and your students, it's coming for the first time to college. For some, it's anxiety about Delta. But We are very excited and want to welcome you. And hopefully this is a session to help with some of that, as well as for those of you who don't have that and are quite excited, just to continue and build on that. We're getting your students, we know, at a crucial moment, more than over a year and a half of virtual learning and missed experiences. And so you'll know that's been an important part of our planning, understanding that our students are coming with different experiences as they come to us this time. But the good news is that the situation is different and really different from where it was a year ago. And you know, in my former role as an HHS secretary, I would just say there is no better solution than the vaccine. And that is a solution that we're so fortunate to have. It is something that continues to be effective against the Delta variant of the virus in terms of those that get sick, and especially with regard to questions like hospitalization. And I think all of you all as parents probably know, and our students know, that in the spring, we made that commitment to requiring vaccines. And we require them of our students and our faculty and staff. Right now, over 3,700 faculty and staff are vaccinated. That's 97% of our full-time staff and faculty. Over 11,000 students. We're at a 90+ vaccination rate for students, and that number is going to go up when a number of our students get their second vaccine, which we haven't counted them as fully vaccinated yet. Our exemptions for religious and medical reasons are under 1% here at the university. And while vaccines, I believe, is, you know, it's a core and essential part of our plan to bring folks back safely, both our students as well as our faculty and staff. We actually are layering our safety and health precautions. And I'll say a little bit, others are going to say more, but I'll touch on a few things that I think are important. We're still going to require wearing masks while indoors. We're going to be testing COVID folks twice a week for those who are exempt from the vaccine or aren't fully vaccinated. We're going to have testing for vaccinated members of our community. I'm fully vaccinated, but I still do weekly testing because I believe in the importance of surveillance testing in the current context that we're in. I believe that's a very important thing for our community. We also heard that people don't want to be required if they've been vaccinated. So what we try to do is create a space for those to voluntary test if you would like to. In addition, we have space for students in our residence halls who test positive to isolate. We are continuing with contact tracing, and we think that's very important to the health and safety, making sure we do that contact tracing, reach out to folks. We encourage and urge folks. We will do that in terms of if we find cases, tell people you should go and be tested, explain to people how you should think about the days that you need to wait before you're tested. We're limiting our in-person classes to 50 students or less. And we are limiting for our staff and faculty the size of in-person meetings. Those are a few of the layers that we are putting in place as part of our health and safety. And there are many other precautions and guidelines, and that can be found online, so I will not go through it all. I also want to mention that this decision-making and how we put together this plan was really based on, since March, laid out 3 principles for decision-making as we move through COVID. And those are still with us, and we still use those today. Number 1, the health and safety of our community. Number 2, how do we best achieve against our core mission of learning and scholarship in the context of COVID? And number 3, what is our role in our community, not just our AU community, but the DC and greater region and the nation and world in terms of how we're helping with the pandemic? Those are the 3 decision-making principles that we've had in place. And that's what's helped create the plan that we have. And we have a new plan for this new chapter. We actually did our return to hybrid work starting this Monday as we gear up for all of your students coming. And we believe, and at the core of all this was the return of the students. And we believe for us that the return of the students and being face-to-face is so important for us to continue to be a special place to work, to live, and to learn. And so we are very excited to have you all. We have worked as a community to get where we are, and that's how we plan to go and lead and keep moving forward. And that's why your all's participation in this session is so important. You are part of our family, our community. As parents, we are working as a community, as one, and we know your students' time here is going to go very quickly. And what we want to do is work to have that be the most positive and a time of real growth for your students. And we're excited to be partners with you in that. So thank you so much for participating in this conversation. And we want this campus that we're going to welcome everybody to and have already started with a few students coming. This campus is going to be the home for your students, and we hope it's going to be your home as well. So thank you so much for trusting us with your students. And I want to emphasize something you're going to hear a lot about also is thanks for doing that in a world where we believe change can't wait. And your students are going to be an important part of changing this world for the better. So thank you. And I will turn things back over to Fanta.
Thank you, President Burwell. Before you leave, there's one question that's come up that I know you have had to answer a few times, and perhaps you might, finish with that. And that is this question that I think is on the minds of families about, how are we thinking about this? And in terms of, what are the chances that we're going to close? What's the chances as we think about our cities, our universities, and so forth, that we might close this fall and then may go back online fully again, is one of the questions that I think is on folks' mind.
So I'm going to speak to this question first, kind of from my old role, in terms of my old role at HHS and as Secretary of Health and Human Services, as I continue to engage in these issues as a former secretary and supporting the efforts around the pandemic, and then specifically around AU. And I think for us as a nation, the idea of words like lockdown, shutdown, are words, and I think those are not the direction that the nation is going to go. And I believe that because we have this incredible tool at hand, and it is an incredibly effective tool. And that tool is vaccination. And I think that we can get to the place, because we know that for the variant that we have in front of us, and it is the most dominant variant. For those of you who have seen, there have been some other variants that are coming, but so far, even the newer variants that come from other places in the world, Delta maintains the place of dominance. So if the new variant that was started in Peru, I think it's Gamma, comes up against Delta, Delta still dominates. And that's the situation, and we know it works. So the vaccinations, I think, are going to create a world where we continue to move to that space, where we are in a place where we will have much more immunity as a nation. We know that Delta is also passing through folks, and that is creating immunity, not in the way you would necessarily want to do that. So I don't see lockdown or shutdowns. I see us moving on a path of continued vaccination. I see us using these layering of the tools that we know. And that's why we took that approach at AU, is because I said it is very important to us to return to a face-to-face environment. And usually what's embedded in the question that I was just asked are really three specific questions. One, are you going to send our students home? And that is not the plan. As I told you, we have isolation facilities. We have invested in that so that we make sure that there are spaces for the students. There are no plans to send students home. What our plan is to be able to handle if we have cases, and they will be breakthrough cases, because for us, we have such a vaccinated population. The second thing that's embedded in that question usually is, will the students' classes go online? And that is not our plan. As you can hear, why we're putting these layers in, why we're requiring masks indoors, why we're actually requiring masks for gatherings of 25 or more outdoors, is so that we can contain and control. That's why we're doing the testing, so we make sure that we can do that, because our plan is to go forward. And so we do not have plans in terms of, I think that's a lot of what's embedded in it. And the last part of that question is, are we planning on having everyone go back to virtual work? And we've put in place a number of things, whether that's how we're doing the hybrid, where some people are in on different days, so we don't have the density that we used to have. We don't have that density. We are requiring that our staff do their meetings and their group meetings virtually. There will be very small meetings where you can have very small groups of people, masked, vaccinated, and in larger areas where there is some space. but the idea is that we will do that in order to maintain that. So no plans to change where we are. I believe that we can work responsibly and use the layering of the tools. That is our plan right now. That is, I know you've seen different things happening at other institutions and universities. We're lucky that we are in a city that focuses on these tools and using these layering of tools. And that's helpful to us too, is to be in a place where the other universities are using these tools. The city itself, we have a mandate again, a mask mandate in the city again, in terms of using those masks indoors. And those are all things that we think can lead to a place where we keep people here, which is what we are excited and hopeful that, and that is our plan.
Thank you, President Burwell. Thank you for spending some time with us. And for our families, I can assure you that there will be many other opportunities for you to engage with President Burwell during this time, including during move-in.
That's what I was going to say. For those of you
who will be coming to campus, she will be here during move-in as well.
I will look forward to seeing you and greeting you and seeing a number of you. And I'll be around during the move-in for some of our sophomores as well. As we're moving those folks in, because they didn't have a move-in, and we know that. We recognize that a number of our sophomores didn't have certain experiences, and we're very focused on trying to make sure that we recreate some of the things that they missed. So I'm looking forward to seeing our students and you all, the parents.
Thank you, President Burwell. And so I'm here joined by several of my colleagues, and President Burwell has to leave us for another commitment. But we are joined this evening by several of my colleagues, because often, as we say at AU, it takes a village, and the village does step up and show up on lots of different occasions. So what we'll do is go very quickly around, literally each person taking just a few seconds to introduce themselves and their function. And then we're going to jump right into the questions, because as I said, you sent a lot of questions and want to be able to get through as many of them as possible. So we'll start with you, Karen.
Hi, folks. My name is Karen Castella, and some of you know me in my role as being the Associate Director for Parent and Family Engagement. More recently, I've also taken on the orientation team into one big group, which is very exciting.
Thank you, Karen.
Yep.
And then I'm going to ask Brianna as well. I know we have our folks who are in the background, but they're part of the AU team. So Brianna, if you can please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Yes, my role here is to answer questions. I am Brianna Wiedock. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Director of First Year Advising, and we are very excited to welcome all of the students back to campus this year.
Thank you, Brianna. Edith, also, who's in the background. While we have Edith trying to get on, let's go to Dr. Monica Jackson.
Hi, good evening. My name is Monica Jackson. I'm Deputy Provost and Dean of Faculty. And in my role, I work on all issues related to faculty. So however your students interact with the faculty, I'll be your point person.
Thank you, Monica. And Dr. David Reitman.
Hello, my name is David Reitman. I'm the Medical Director of the Student Health Center, and hopefully we will not need to see too many of your students. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean Logan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gene Logan. I'm the Director of AU Central, the one-stop student service center for student accounts, registration, and veteran services, answering your billing questions I anticipate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Tracy Calandrillo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Calandrillo. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Assistant Vice President of Campus Life, and my role, I work with many of our direct student services departments. Several of my team are on the call as well tonight. And I am also a parent of another incoming first-year Eagle. So I'm going to be entering into a role that I've spent a lot of time supporting other parents, and I'll be, I guess, multitasking this year. So very happy to be with you all.
Thank you. Jimmy Ellis.
Hey everyone, my name is Jimmy Ellis. I'm the Assistant Dean of Undergraduate Education. I work with my colleagues in undergraduate education, also academic student services. That includes academic support, the AUX program, our core curriculum and so forth. So happy to be here tonight.
Thank you. And Jeff Brown?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jeff Brown. I serve as the Dean of Students here at AU. I oversee our general student care and support, as well as our student conduct for AU.
Thank you. These are members of the team who are with us this evening. And as I said, we're going to jump right in because I know you're eager to kind of get to some of the substance of our time here today. And so one of the things that I thought we might start off with is maybe Dr. Reitman, you can talk a little bit about from the student perspective in terms of some of the health and safety. Perhaps you can talk to us a little bit about testing. You know, President Burwell mentioned that we're going to be doing testing of students. Perhaps you can talk a little bit more about some of that as well, if you don't mind.
Sure thing. Thank you, Fanta. And again, welcome everybody. We are going to be offering testing. It'll be free to all students. Testing will be open at least 5 days a week during the day. What is our expectation for testing is going to be is that any student who has any kind of symptom that could be related to COVID, and we all know these symptoms at this point, just cold symptoms, cough, sore throat, fever, loss of taste or smell, anything like that. In those situations, we are definitely going to want students to be getting a test. This is provided that students are vaccinated. There's a very small number of unvaccinated students who will have required testing as part of this also. But the testing will be available. It will be free for students, and the testing is done with a private lab that we've contracted with over the course of the past 6 months. It's worked extremely well. It's a saliva-based test, so there's no putting anything deep into the nose. Students basically have to produce about 0.5 milliliter of saliva into a little test tube. It gets sent off to this private lab that's located here in DC. So our turnaround time is generally in the range of around 12 hours to 24 hours maximum, really no longer than that. And we've had extremely good success with this turnaround time with our students. So.
Great. So to follow up, Dr. Reitman, one of the questions that I know keeps coming up because we have folks who are coming from all around the country and the world is, we have a vaccine mandate and a vaccine requirement. And as you said, very few of our community members will not be vaccinated. So the question is, why do we need to have masks? Why is there a mask mandate?
So that is a great question. And the main reason for right now is because there is a variant out there that is the vaccines are not fully protective against. Now, that said, and I can speak as somebody who's had this variant myself. People who are vaccinated, will get a mild upper respiratory illness. Okay, it'll be a cold or a mild flu. What we are not seeing at all is young people or anybody who has been vaccinated getting the severe COVID symptoms that we're seeing in different parts of the country right now, or that we saw, say, back in 2020. So the fact of the matter is that we want to keep our community healthy, but it's not just, the fact that we've got all our students and our staff and faculty basically are vaccinated, but we want to make sure that the greater community is also going to be protected, which is why we're having everyone wear masks, and to also make sure that we protect anyone who is immunocompromised that may be in our community, or people who couldn't get a vaccination because of medical reasons or religious reasons, or other people who got other family members at home, where even if they got a very mild case of the Delta variant, can happen, they won't bring it home to somebody who couldn't get a vaccine, or young children or anything like that. So I think, speaking to what President Burwell was saying before, this is about looking at the greater community, not just within AU, but looking at our entire community in DC, in the region, and as change makers, setting an example for the entire country. So. Thank you. There are lots of questions about the booster shot, because I think we all heard this afternoon the news. We all kind of expected that, for those of us who are living this day in and day out and tracking this. And the question really that keeps coming up from you all as families is, with the booster shot being recommended, will AU be providing opportunities? Yes, we're working actually with Walgreens so that when it is time for booster shots to be administered, that we can actually have clinics at American University for the booster shots. And of course, we're going to go in the order, because it's recommended for 8 months after your second dose, right?
Dr. Reitman. So yes, please rest assured, when it's time for the booster shot, we will make sure that we're working with our partners, and Walgreens is the one that we're working with. It's nearly 2 minutes walk from American University, and they've already indicated to us that they're very interested in being able to do that. So I hope we've answered that question for the many of you who've talked about the booster shots. There's also a lot of questions that several of you have asked about for the unvaccinated. How do we know that, how do we know that they're masking? And then there are lots of questions about, you've talked about mask, but if my student is in their room, should they be masking? And the answer is no, because we kind of consider that all almost like a family dwelling, and they're in their rooms. So we're not expecting them to mask while they're in their rooms with their roommates. But we do ask that they have the conversations with their roommates so they can agree on how they're going to really, in many ways, engage each other in the rooms. When they're in the lounges, yes, we do ask that people do mask, because those are considered still public areas within the residence hall. There's also a lot of questions about visitors. Please know that, yes, as you're dropping off your students, we are allowing 2 guests per student, but that is only for the moving period and with a very limited amount of time in dropping off your students and kind of, as we say, making sure that they are settled and then kind of having the goodbyes. We will not allow visitors into our residence hall once classes begin. Only university affiliates will be allowed in the residence hall. And that means a student who may have a friend in another residence hall will be able to visit that student, but we will not allow outside guests to actually come into our residence hall to visit students, let alone to stay overnight with our students. That is part of the layering that President Burwell talked about. We really need to make every effort, knowing that our community is at a high rate of vaccination, to make sure that we are providing all of the protective measures that we can for our community. And so I know this question keeps coming up, but I wanted to really reiterate that we will have a no visitor policy, particularly when we get started during the first few months, to make sure that that everything is settled and for sort of health and safety. The other question that I think has come up is around isolation and quarantine. And what can a person do while they're under quarantine? Maybe, Dr. Reitman, you can answer a little bit in the DC sort of definition, what is permissible under quarantine? And then also let's talk a little bit about isolation. And let me start by prefacing, the isolation space we talked about are really for students who are residential students. We do not have the capacity to provide isolation space for students who are living off campus. And per DC guidelines, those who are living off campus are considered part of a family dwelling, and therefore would be expected to isolate within the areas that they're in. And so maybe, Dr. Reitman, you can talk a little bit about quarantine, and then maybe talk a little bit about isolation, please.
Great. So in terms of quarantining, DC has guidelines that specifically say that for anyone who's coming from out of state who specifically is not vaccinated, there is required to be a quarantine period of a period of time during which students are not going to be allowed to, they really are supposed to stay in their space, in their rooms. They can leave if they need to have food brought to them, if they need to get medical supplies, going to the pharmacy, anything like that. But otherwise, students will be expected to stay in their space and be doing essentially a quarantine during that time. And we are recommending that if they would like to keep the quarantine as short as possible, that they get tested at day 3 to 5 of that quarantine period. Now, that quarantine, remember, is for students who are vaccinated, even if they get an exposure, they're not required to quarantine. They're going to be required to test, if they're vaccinated and they get exposed. So if they have a friend or a roommate who had a diagnosis of COVID-19, they would have to test, but they are not required to quarantine during that time, the way that things were 6 months ago, 8 months ago, when we did not have a vaccinated population. Isolation is going to be different. A student who actually has been diagnosed with COVID-19 is going to have to isolate for a full 10 days. And I'm going to defer to Fanta to talk a little bit more in detail about what that might look like. But that will be a period of time when they will have to be refraining from going into dining halls, being exposed to other people, going to classes, anything like that. And that is, and we are going to be taking that extremely seriously, obviously, because this is a very important part of maintaining the health and safety of our community.
Thank you, Dr. Reitman. Yes, so for those students who are part of our residential facilities and that will put into an isolation space, we will be providing food during that period of time. And for any of our students who are in isolation, whether they're on campus or we know that they've tested positive for COVID-19 and may be off campus, we will have folks who will reach out to them to check in and make sure that they're okay and that they're fulfilling their isolation sort of period. And so that will be one of the ways that we'll continue to do outreach. In addition, there's a question that if a student is sick, then through our student health center, the student health center will be working with the student on the care that they'll need. And if it's referrals that are needed, they'll work with the student on the appropriate referral to be done. And that is for any student who's on campus or off campus. That is how we're going to go about working with students who are sick. I would like for Dr. Jackson to maybe talk about what this means for the student, for classes. For a student who will need to be quarantined and therefore will not be able to go to class, and or a student who's isolated, can you talk a little bit about what guidance has been provided to faculty and how we're going to support students during that period of time? And so could perhaps, Jeff Brown from the Dean of Students Office.
Yeah, sure. So we've been working quite a bit with the faculty and giving them guidance and recommendations on how they're to work with students that are sick. Of course, we do not want students coming to class if they're sick. So we have asked them to be very flexible. So your students should be able to talk directly with the faculty and make arrangements. The faculty, of course, all know how to teach online. So a lot of them will be having their courses recorded and available online. We've also talked to the faculty about having a few office hours online, although we do want to have very much a face-to-face presence on campus, and our faculty all will be on campus. But for the occasional case when students do get sick, so the faculty do know to make modifications. So just if students work directly with the faculty, if they have any problems, you're welcome to send them to speak to me and I can help you with that.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Jeff?
Sure, thank you, Monica. So just a quick add to that. The Office of the Dean of Students will be responsible for communicating to your students' faculty should they be placed in isolation or quarantine. So we will be re-emphasizing the same messages that Jean Jackson just spoke about and alerting the faculty that your student would not be in classes during those times. And then in addition to that, the staff in the Dean of Students office would be available if your student needs any additional support or to, in terms of connecting them any other resources on campus during those times.
And that's for students living anywhere, whether they're living on campus or off campus. Those supports that we've talked about are for all of our students who may find themselves in quarantine and or in isolation. So just to reiterate that. The other question that I think may come up as well is, perhaps Jimmy Ellis, you may want to talk a little bit about what are some of the supports that are available to students overall as they're transitioning, our sophomores, our first year students, and other students are transitioning. Maybe if you don't mind taking maybe just a few minutes to talk about the support services that are there.
Yeah, that's right. From an academic point of view, we've thought long and hard about how to support students both proactively in the subject matters that they might be struggling in, but also just in the process of learning and being an AU student. For some of our students, it's kind of getting reacclimated to an on-campus learning environment. And so we have a few things in place. First, we have one-on-one tutoring that's available in subject matters that students have typically found difficult. These sessions are all held online with peer educators, and we have that set up, and students are introduced to that through their coursework and also through their academic advising units. You'll learn more about that. We also have center-based tutoring. So for example, our writing center and also our math stats lab to support all subjects and disciplines in both the quantitative and the writing aspects of that. And one of the services that I'm most excited about to offer is our academic wellness coaching, our academic coaching program. And what they do here is professional staff that have one-on-one appointments with students to talk about time management, task prioritization, how to organize your calendar and your schedule. Just kind of the business of organizing yourself and your studies so that you can be a really good student. And so we are all ready to go, ready to deliver things in person, online, and start working with students. And one bit of advice for this group is don't wait until, encourage your students to not wait until they're struggling to go seek those services. Be one of the first ones through the door to go seek the tutoring, go seeking the academic coaching, start getting to a good habit that early, do some of that proactive work. And then I think that the students will have a good time adjustment to studies back at AU.
Thank you. Another question around the academics is, can students study abroad, Dr. Jackson, this fall?
Yes, for now, we are making plans for students to study abroad. They should work directly with the study abroad office. They are monitoring, of course, conditions across the various sites to be sure. So things can change at any second, but they are making plans for some of our sites for students to study abroad.
Okay. There was also this question about performing arts students. And just today I approved the Department of Performing Arts put together their health and safety guidance. And literally just this morning, I approved their health and safety guidance. So yes, we understand that students coming back face-to-face, those who are in the arts program, in the music program, theater, etc. And so there will be provisions that would allow them under certain circumstances to not have their mask on with other health and safety guidelines in place for those students. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to point out. The other question that's come up is, Dr. Jackson, is in the classrooms, will students be expected to wear masks, and will faculty be expected to wear masks when they're teaching?
So we are sending more guidance again to faculty. So faculty will not be required to wear masks while they're teaching, as long as they can stay a safe distance away from the faculty. And again, this is to help the student learning in the classes, especially some of our language classes, other classes where it may be difficult for the students to hear the faculty if they do have the mask on, but there is strict guidance that if they can't stay safe distance away from the faculty, then they are to wear their mask. And we are asking the students to have their mask on in the classrooms.
Thank you. I want to circle back because there's a lot of questions about compliance. And I always find that to be an interesting question. And it's compliance around what happens if students break the rules? What happens if they're not masking? What happens, if they're not following the guidance and so forth that are provided? Maybe Jeff, you can speak a little bit to that from the Dean of Students perspective.
Sure, thank you, Fanta. So of course, you've heard some of the expectations that Dean Jackson put out there in terms of the classroom. And when we have students who maybe are not complying with requests, whether it be in the classroom, in a residence hall, or elsewhere on campus, the first thing that's generally going to happen is that a staff member, or potentially even a student staff member, is going to generally request the student to do so. We're focused on a community of care to make sure that we're taking care of one another, and that we are confronting people that maybe are not in compliance. Should things continue where we do have someone who maybe is a habitual violator of our policies, and these are our policies through our health and safety directives, here at AU, we would have the ability to bring that student through our student conduct process, just as we would if we had a staff or a faculty member. There are processes for those that do not comply with our policies. And of course, we have those procedures outlined in our student code of conduct, which would be similar to any other violation that happens on campus.
And one of the things that we're finding, and my colleagues can chime in, Dr. Calandrilla and everybody else, we have found that the peer-to-peer sort of accountability is a really effective tool, and that we have found that students, we're starting from the premise that our students are committed to being here, and that one of the things that they really don't want to see is a situation where, because there's been no compliance, that we're all going to suffer from it. And so this idea that you have to hold your peers accountable, that if you see something, say something, is a really important part of this process of living together. We're also under no illusion, because we're talking about 18, 19, 20-year-old students, that they're going to be together. They're going to gather, So this idea that they're going to be in the residence hall and they're going to be physically distanced, we're under no illusion that that's going to happen. They're going to be with their friends. They will want to hang out in the lounges with their friends and so forth. And those are not things that we're going to forbid, because that was one of the reasons we're so keen on the vaccine. One of the things that's important is making sure that students understand the level of risk. It's different when you're spending time with the folks that you're spending time with and you're in the lounges. That is different from going off campus to, for example, a large party, and then going to a large party and not wearing masks at that large party, where you don't know the vaccination status of most of the people who are there. Those are the type of behaviors that we have to guard against. And we really do need to communicate to our students the level of risk that they're taking based on some of the decisions that they make in terms of how they're interacting. And that's one of the things that I want to kind of come back to. And I don't know if my colleagues, Tracy and others, have anything that they want to add to this piece, or David Reitman, but it's really about understanding that students are going to be students. They've been, feeling isolated for a while. There will be this honeymoon period of wanting to just reconnect with each other. And our goal is not to say, oh, well, you know what, you're going to the dining room, you can't be seated with your friends. Of course, they'll be seated with their friends. And yes, our dining rooms, our dining halls will be open. And yes, we'll have multiple venues. There'll be grab and go options. There will also be the opportunities to have sort of buffets, but it will not be the traditional buffets. Students will have to be masked when they're going up to get their food, and they will not be able to just serve themselves. They will have somebody who's basically going to be serving at that point, because for health and safety reasons, we're following very tightly the food and beverage guidelines for health and safety. And so those measures will be put in place. And yes, we'll be checking for density in our main dining hall. And so those are all the things that will be provided in terms of health and safety. But we will have all of our dining facilities will be operational when we come back. I want to switch a little bit, and I want to talk about, Jean, can you please talk a little bit about some deadlines and reminders of things for families to expect and students to expect as we begin, whether it's talk a little bit about the tuition insurance, a little bit about health insurance, billing, if you can please talk a little bit about those things, please.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Fanta. So talk a little bit about billing. We're getting lots of inquiries about the bills with that. Unless you are on a monthly payment plan, the bill was due August 1st. We're getting lots of inquiries from people about 529 or other mailed payments that have not yet been posted to the account. So I can assure you that there does seem to be a delay in some of the mail delivery, but this will not affect your students' ability to move in to the residence hall, use the dining halls, and attend their classes. We're processing and posting those payments as soon as we get them. No late fees are going to be applied for that. So, it's just, there has been delays, around that area, but you can be assured that it's not going to negatively affect your experience starting semester. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that, again, these are, all these questions. We have, AU has partnered with an insurance company called GradGuard to provide tuition refund insurance to our families. So what this is, it's totally optional. If a student gets sick and has to withdraw from their classes at any point during the semester and go back home to get better, then there are tuition policies that are available that will cover those expenses. So those expenses could be tuition, fees, room, board. You as the purchaser can decide the amount that you would like to purchase this policy to cover. The cost is relatively minimal. It's about $100 for every $10,000 worth of coverage. COVID is covered. So if your child does contract COVID and has to withdraw from all of their classes, and you're still charged for those classes beyond a certain point in the semester, if you purchase this policy, then you could get reimbursed for those tuition, room, and board charges. So I highly recommend that, and I'll put a link to that in the chat so that you can check that out. Again, totally up to you as a parent or guardian. This is not a charge that is going to be on the student's account. This is an agreement that you enter into directly with GradGuard and purchase the policy from GradGuard, our tuition provider. The deadline for buying a policy each semester is the end of the second week of classes, right? So again, I'll put a link to that in there, and I'm happy to answer any other questions to try to reassure you. I think all of us here, want to try to reassure you as much as possible and work together to make this process as smooth as possible. All right, so if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to switch a little bit to wellness, and Dr. Calandrillo, part of your portfolio is looking at the area of wellness, and perhaps you can speak a little bit to that. And especially given the pandemic, we know that students are going to come in with some of the challenges that we know around wellness. If you could maybe speak a little bit to some of that.
Yes, Fanta, I'd be glad to talk about that. Before I start, I want to circle back to the comments that you were making, Fanta, about students and the sort of range of behaviors or how it will go for us to support students. And the one of the things we've been doing for the last few months is to that point of engaging peers in the conversations with each other around creating that community of care within the student community. We have a team of health and safety ambassadors that are students who have been absolutely invaluable for us as the faculty and administrators and staff at the university, but for each other. And last week, we created a summit for faculty and staff at the university, reflecting on the year, going through preparations. And the absolute highlight of that summit was a student panel. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring that up is because we really, really try to listen to the student voices and just listening to them speak to each other and speak about their excitement to be back together, some apprehensions about just the reality of coming back into a space with each other and navigating the new, the new rules that'll be involved in their interactions. But I just wanted to say that because I tend to be a glass half full person, but I was just really struck by the care and intention in the student experiences and what they're thinking about each other, which just, we tend to think of students as, oh, you're kind of like thinking about yourself and you want to have fun, but also there's a lot of care and concern for each other. And we really try to partner with our students around that. So to talk a little bit about well-being in a broader sense, going back to some of what President Burwell said about the planning that we've been doing over the last more than a year and thinking about what we need to be really aware of when we return to an in-person community the way that we're going to be is around well-being. I don't need to say to you all, because I think we are very well aware that the pandemic related to COVID has spun within it many other very impactful experiences, some directly connected to COVID and some not. But so our students come to us with that very intense lived experience over the last year and a half. And so we've been spending a lot of time thinking about lessons learned as we've had to move our services to a virtual modality. And so very similar to what Jimmy mentioned about some of our academic support services, within the wellness arena, we talked a little bit about one part of our healthcare that's in our student health center. Another part of our healthcare is our strategies around mental health and the resources that we have. And so just to speak very quickly about that, we use a layered approach. So we know, for example, that not everyone on our campus, not all students are going to think about, oh, I really need to go and speak with a provider in a mental health facility. But what almost all of our students are going to experience at one point or another is stress, perhaps a sense of, wow, I'm overwhelmed. There's too much for me to take on. Or what do I do to manage my stress differently? They're all learning to practice this as independent adults. And so the first resource that we have that's available to every single student, and they can actually enroll in their account now, is a wellness platform called You at American. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. They can start using it now. And what it is a combination of information about our resources here on campus paired with a wealth of information about different kinds of wellness mental health issues. So the platform has focus on career planning. It has focus on, how do you get more sleep? What are the ways that you prioritize yourself within the different things that you're taking on in your responsibility? How do you navigate a world where there's conversations about identity and well-being and you're not sure where you fit in all of that? So that platform is something that I really want to encourage your students to enroll in themselves. Our faculty and staff also have access to this. And so we're really building it in as a starting point because you don't have to go seek care in order to use those resources. The next layer is our counseling center clinicians and our mental health providers that are in the student health center as well. We've had a very robust in-person sort of traditional counseling center for many decades. And as we transition that service into being fully virtual, which let me tell you, that was quite a 3-week period when we did that. And they executed it incredibly well. What we've learned from that experience of needing to take our mental health services to a virtual environment was that there were some things that were limiting that we needed to address when we brought our community back in person, but we will continue to offer a good portion of our therapy services in a virtual environment. Those are limited in some ways, but we're excited about being able to meet our students in those different ways, because we actually found for a lot of students that was a very effective way for them to receive therapy services. Many of our students also continue to work with a therapist that they had before they came to college. So that's an option that is possible as well. We've added additional providers to our team in the counseling center, which is a really important point for us when we thought about, do we have the right sized resource for our students? And then a third piece that, again, we already had some of, but we've really added to, is we've partnered with a couple of different really forward-thinking companies that provide services to our students who are studying abroad, to our community when people have concerns about a student. So if there's any concern about, I'm wondering if this person is experiencing a mental health crisis, those urgent care resources are available 24 hours a day globally. And so we don't have a barrier to people being seen for that level of urgent care in our community, because that can be accessed at any point in time. Again, I'll put a link into the chat for people if you're interested in learning more about our mental health resources. But that's just part of the overall community of care. And so to wrap up this part of it, what I would say with wellness is we also spend quite a bit of time supporting our faculty and staff. I actually have done a couple of trainings today with how we can pay attention to what faculty need in order to support our students when the students are struggling. So they know what the resources are, and they know how to consult with those on our team who have that as their professional focus. And we strive to be as responsive as we can, knowing that our community really needs to have places where they can ask questions and share concerns with each other.
Thank you, Tracy. I want to sort of, with the time that we have, I want to get to two topics that I know are on everyone's mind. And we get these questions all the time. And that is, are students going to have fun? Are they going to have community? What is the life of the campus going to be? And it's things around club sports, community service, going to the gym, the library. First of all of our services and facilities are fully open. Let's start with that. So whether it's the gym, whether it's the library, whether it's any of those things. Also, yes, we will be having internships, and our students will be able to go to their internships. I don't know if Dr. Jackson, you want to just take a minute to talk a little bit about the internship piece of this, because I know that's always a question that comes up. We're having a problem hearing you.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. Yes. Yeah. So students will be able to still participate in internships. We are working with some guidance that we're going to provide the employers with so that they know our safety guidelines, and making sure that the students are following those same guidelines no matter what the internships process there. We still want them masked. We still want them social distancing, since they will be coming back on campus. But the students should work with their advisors on securing those internships, but they are definitely available this year.
And same thing with community service. We're going to do the same thing. There will be guidelines on health and safety related to community service. And so we work with our community partners on making sure that that happens. Regarding, club sports, regarding clubs and organizations, yes, our students are very active. We know that. We have many recognized clubs and organizations on campus. They're going to have some events that are in person. They're going to have some events that are virtual, and they're going to have some events that are hybrid model. Our Kennedy Political Union is already lining up speakers as we speak for the coming fall. And so there will be this vibrant campus community. Part of our role is to make sure that anything that we can do outdoors would be best, but we will have clearly several events that will be indoors. And again, we're working with our clubs and organizations on what the health and safety guidelines would be for those. And rec and fitness, again, and intramural will all be actively engaged. It's also important for you all to know that as your students come back to campus, and as President Burwell said, our workforce is hybrid. And by hybrid means there's some days when they're physically on campus, And there are other days when they're working remotely from home. And it also means that our services will be hybrid. There's some services, and sometimes when the service will be in person, and then there's some services that will be virtual. And part of that is also because we have found that for our students, for example, if they need to see their advisor, and it may be just for a 30-minute conversation, and it's a day when they don't really need to be on campus, we don't want the student to come to campus just for that conversation for 30 or 45 minutes. And some students prefer the virtual, and so that'll be an option. And again, some students will want to. So when we talk about layered, when we talk about hybrid, that's really what we're talking about in terms of how we're thinking about our services. Lastly, moving. It's the countdown. And actually, as we speak, some of our students are already here. Our residence hall, students are already here. I ran into many of them as I was doing the tours of the buildings. And so we're already seeing students who are coming to campus. And so with move-in, there's quite a few questions. And one of those is, what can we expect from move-in? We will be asking parents to help their students with move-in. We will have movers and we'll have volunteers. And the volunteers are faculty and staff and other students who are there to volunteer. But as President Burwell said, this is about being in community and of community. And so for family members who will be coming with their students, you too will be helping and assisting with moving so that we can make sure the belonging gets to the right place, that your students is well settled. So it will be a team effort when you do come to campus for moving. I don't know if there's anything else, Karen, that you wanted to add specifically to moving. And then lastly, before we finish, I want to make sure that we also explain to you parents how we're going to be communicating with you. There's some things that we will not be able to communicate with you on, starting with things having to do with health. The Student Health Center has different guidelines. The Counseling Center, they have different guidelines. And so maybe, Karen, if there's anything else you want to add about moving, and then I want to finish with communication with parents to end our session today.
I would just say very briefly with move-in, a lot of folks have been asking whether they're actually being held to this 2-hour window. We're not going to stand there with stopwatches to keep you out if your 2 hours ends. But I do want to, be mindful that our halls are going to be really busy. The elevators are going to be primarily for moving carts, not people. So your comfort also matters here. And to that end, Fanta and I want to invite you to come and join us in the Bridge Cafe all during move-in week to take a break, get a cup of coffee, hang out with us while your student does a lot of their line waiting. And also parents, I'm gonna say, I really think that you should allow your student and their roommate to make the decisions about how they want to use their shared space together. That's an important part of team bonding. So it's really not about how much time you spend in the room helping them place all their posters. Make the bed, help them fill a drawer, and then find some other activities that you can do outside so your student can get to the business of making friends and getting settled in.
Thank you. There was a question about frequency. Yes, frequency, there are going to be some assistance provided when you come to the frequency for moving as well. And so that is part of the moving process. And then lastly, this question about what we're going to communicate to families. You're going to be hearing a lot from us. We have our newsletters, we have our social media presence, webinars. This is not going to be the first and last. Believe me when I say that we do a lot of webinars. Karen and I feel often that you can never over communicate. And so in some levels, you can never over communicate. And other things, we do have very clear guidelines about what we can and cannot communicate. So for our Student Health Center, no, you will not get that call from Dr. Reitman and the team there about your student. So that's important for you to understand in terms of the purview that they have. The same thing with the Counseling Center. You're not going to be hearing from the Counseling Center, our psychologists about what is taking place with your student. And so that's really important to understand. And that is going to be part of the transition that we keep talking about. There is that transition. Of course, anything that is life and death, the university will be, taking that into account, and we'll have modalities for how we engage with that. But it's really important that when it comes to healthcare, it's important to understand the confidentialities that our staff have to abide by. Any other things that this group wants to share before we finish for today? I'm going to say this to our families, and I know I say this a lot. This is a transition. And let me just say this. it's not going to be perfect. It's not. This is still a pandemic. And it means that things are going to happen. As you've heard from Dr. Reitman, do we expect breakthrough infections? Yes, we do. The question is, does it end up being hospitalization and so forth? No, because of the vaccination rate, we believe that yes, if we have breakthrough infections, as Dr. Reitman described, those are some of the symptoms and things that will be there. And I really want to make sure that we all manage our expectations, that it's not going to be perfect. But what is key is being able to provide our students with as much of a holistic experience as we can, understanding that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. The other piece that I also want to talk to parents, to families about, is that the transition is a transition for all, for the students and for their families. And so there will be times when Karen, myself, Dr. Calandrillo, Dr. Reitman, Jeff Brown, Dr. Jackson, Jimmy Ellis, Brianna Wiedock, all of us are going to say, you know what? We'll listen to you, but you're going to have to learn to let go. Take a deep breath and let go. And part of that is because for your student to have gotten to AU, they've come in with quite a lot. And part of it is we all have to trust. And trusting doesn't mean that they're not going to make mistakes. All of us have been in higher ed long enough to know that those things are going to happen. And as Jimmy Ellis said, the key is not to wait too long, not to wait to the point that it's become so evident that really they're in kind of a deep hole for us to then hear the help. So this sort of seeking help behavior is something we strongly encourage students to really avail themselves of. The resources are here. And, faculty will do outreach, if they're seeing something, they'll do outreach. But at some point, we also want our students to develop self-efficacy. And that's incredibly important. It is not just about getting the A's. It is also about life education. And that's going to be an important part of their journey with us. And so there'll be times when we'll have those conversations with you because you will want to do it for your student. And we will say, because we don't believe that we're doing them a favor. They're going to have to learn those things. And they have the capability to learn it. And so with that, I don't know if my colleagues have any last words, but again, we're excited. We're going to all learn together this semester. We talk about uncertainty. All of us, are under some level of uncertainty. And as Tracy said, she too will be a parent navigating the waters. Jimmy Ellis, children are going to school. So all of us also have our own lives as well. And so in many ways, we're all navigating multiple transitions as we speak. And so my last words to all of you is, let's assume goodwill, but more importantly, let's practice grace and understand that we're not gonna have it perfect. The key is when things are not perfect, what do we learn from that? And how do we work together to get to a better place? That's probably the most important lesson that I think we'll all learn throughout this sort of fall journey. So thanks again to all of my colleagues. Really appreciate you again spending your evening where you could be spending your evening on so many other things. Thank you for spending your evening with us, and for our families, we look forward to partnering with you. And for those who will make the journey to campus and to Washington, D.C., we look forward to meeting you during your time here. And for those who are not able to make the journey here, please know that you're not forgotten. We will make sure through our webinars and through many other outreach to make sure that you too feel like you're very much part of the AU family. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Take care of yourselves.